Yeah, I came involved with this project. Actually, I was traveling through Jackson, Mississippi, and I ended up going to the IMMC, the International Museum of Muslim Cultures, exhibit there. And I was fascinated by what I saw. One of the things that fascinated me was the fact that, studying the history of Africa, and in particular the influence of Islam in Africa, that books was the #1 commodity. And because I think Africans understood the value of knowledge. I know that I left impressed. I know that I left that museum wanting to know more.
Some people think that the museum has some kind of Islamic agenda. Really what it's trying to do is to enlighten people about the history of Africa, the history of Mississippi, the history of Islam, and to show how all of those are connected. Because not a lot of folks in the United States know that Islam is part of America's history. Muslims were, in the U.S. long before we even had a constitution. Because so many of the Africans who were enslaved came from predominantly Muslim parts of Africa, it was these enslaved Africans who actually built the southern colonies. This idea that religious diversity is a new thing to the United States history and to America is simply, factually wrong. And part of the work of the museum is to dig back several centuries and show that we've been a pluralistic country ethnically, religiously, culturally, right from the very, very beginning. And that to say that Muslims don't belong in the United States is basically to ignore the history of the South and the history of Mississippi itself, which is a living witness to how long Islam has been part of the United States.
I definitely believe that the museum helps to counteract some of the Islamophobia that we see around here and throughout the country and throughout much of the world, to be honest. I was reading a story recently that showed that a greater percentage of Americans have a negative opinion of Islam than there are percentage of Americans who have ever met a Muslim. So one of the things that the museum is doing is helping to counteract some of these negative stereotypes by showing that Islam means different things to different people, just like any religion does. To be a Christian doesn't mean the same thing to one person as it does to another necessarily. Similarly with Islam, it doesn't have to represent the negative values that are often reflected on TV and some of the worst news stories that we see.
And this is, I think, one of the things we can contribute the most to of anything we can do, and that is to be a testimony to the richness of our culture, the differences in our culture, how we can learn from each other, and how, rather than being handicapped by those differences, that we can be the beneficiaries of those differences. So that's where we are now. Mississippi, I think, is a state where we can learn so much from those cultural and racial differences that have been the cause of misunderstanding in the past.
Since retiring from the NBA, I've dedicated myself in supporting such causes as the IMMC, the International Museum of Muslim Cultures. I would like for you to truly join me in supporting this great cause, whether it's financially, with whatever resources that you have, with your time, in sharing this information with anyone that you may know that is interested. It's a praiseworthy project because I think everyone should be aware of their history. No one should be deprived of that. I think people suffer when they don't know their true history of themselves.